Time for another board game review, and this time we have the game On the Underground London/Berlin. This was sent to me by LudiCreations and is designed by Sebastian Bleasdale. Let's take the nice slip cover off here. The massive network of London Underground stations makes up one of the most complex transportation systems in the world, and On the Underground challenges you to develop it. Build the most successful lines, connect them to landmarks, and attract passenger traffic. This edition of On the Underground includes the all-new Berlin map, comprised of the U-Bahn and S-Bahn networks. So there's two sides of the map. I'll show you how to play both of them. So in On the Underground, you are competing to build the most valuable and convenient transportation network in London or Berlin. Each player will control a certain number of lines. In a 4-player game, you each control 2 lines. At the beginning of each turn, there will be 4 destination cards that are turned face up over here, corresponding to stations on the map. And on your turn, you take 4 actions, followed by the passenger's movement. So one action is simply just taking a branch tile, which I'll explain later. The other is building track on these lines. Once you've done your 4 actions, then the passenger token moves to reach 1 or 2 of these stations, which are marked by these Big Ben markers on the board. After that, the cards are replaced by new ones, and you score points by building track and connecting lines to various types of stations. In the London map, by building a circular line, and by having the passenger use your lines while they're moving. Once all the cards in the deck have been drawn, then the game is done after all players have taken the same number of turns. So let's go through your turn. Like I said, 4 actions. And one of those actions is taking a branch tile. What branch tiles are useful for is if you have 2 of them, you can spend them to extend your line from somewhere other than one of its ends. I'll get into that a little bit later. But let's say to start off, red player is going to build some track. Now the first track token of any color can be placed anywhere on the board. So let's say they build it here. I'm going to move this aside so you can see. Right there. Then, when you extend this line, it has to be from the ends. The end of a line is defined as a station with only 1 track token of that line currently connecting to it. So, this is an end, this is an end. If I build a station here, now this is the end, this is the end. You can see there are different numbers of lines here. In this case, 5 different lines can build their track here. So let's say I build there and I build let's say I build, instead of going that way, I actually go this way, and we'll go this way. So that was my turn. Just 4 track, that's 4 actions. If I had 2 of these branch tiles, instead I could spend them and extend my track from not one of the ends. So normally I have to build off the ends, but if I use 2 of those tiles, I could build one here. So that's what those branch tiles are useful for, because oftentimes you are restricted by where the ends are. Now, every time you connect to one of these blue stations, these are national rails, you get 1 point every time. So red player or red-orange player will get a point for doing so. Whenever you connect to one of these stations, a terminus station, you get 2 points and a free branch tile. So a purple player builds here, 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 here. That'd be 2 points, 1 point, 3 points for purple player. On the London map, these green tiles are connections, and they are randomly distributed at the beginning of the game. If you can connect 2 of the same tiles with your line, you will get 3 points. So if red player managed to do 1, 2 like that, they would get a point for this, and they connected the 2 fork and knife icons, so that would give them 3 more points on top of that. Another way you can score points is if you finish a loop. So let's say this line did this. This would obviously have to be over multiple turns, but let's say they finally completed a loop like this. Then they would score 2 points because these 2 stations are within that loop. Once a player has taken all the actions of their turn, the passenger must be moved. And on the board, there are 4 different destinations you can see. The 3 gold ones and that silver one over there. Now, if there are both kinds, then first, the passenger will move to one of the gold express stations, and then move to one gray standard station. If there are only gray or gold stations, they're going to move to the closest gold, and if they're only gray stations, they're going to move to the closest gray. Here's where the passenger's route gets a little confusing. When traveling, the passenger will travel along lines where the players have built and move onto empty track spaces if necessary. However, they will choose to move according to the following rules. If the passenger will choose the route that involves the least amount of empty track spaces. So let's pretend that these track pieces weren't here. Now, normally you would think, oh, well, he would just go here, right? Because it's so close. But if you look at the map, this station is actually directly connected by lines. So the passenger is actually going to go this way because they don't want to use empty tiles if possible. So they're going to go to Putney. Now, every line they used along the way, those players score a point. So the red player would score a point, purple player scores a point. If two or more routes involve the same amount of empty spaces, the passenger will choose the route with the fewest or no lines. So let's say I reset this, and let's say the board looked more like this. In this case, they want to do the fewest, or let's say the empty spaces are the same. They will choose the route with the fewest or no lines. So in this case, they would actually just go straight down here because that one requires no lines. The number of tokens in the track doesn't actually have anything to do with anything. It's only the number of different lines they have to use. So in a case like this, let's say they're both connected. Let's say it was actually connected like this. Now you would think, oh, well, wouldn't the passenger go here? Or wouldn't the passenger take this? Because that's actually a shorter number of track tokens. But actually, they want to use as few lines as possible. So they would actually go here instead of here, because this would involve them having to switch to another line. And finally, if two or more routes involve the same amount of empty spaces and the same number of lines, then the player whose turn it is gets to choose which route it is. Now, that can be a little confusing because most people just think, wouldn't they just go to the closest station? But, and I do agree that it is kind of convoluted, but as you play the game, it makes a little more sense. But anyway, so a normal turn for this passenger is going to take the red line to this station, so red player gets a point. Then they have to go to a silver station, and since there's only one, they're going to take the red line again and just take one empty road here. And that means red player gets another point. Those stations that were accessed are then removed from the board, and then you draw two new cards. So we have Oxford Circus and High Street Kensington. So those two locations get new markers on the map, and that is the end of the turn. And that's all you do. Each player just takes turns, putting down their track, or using the branch tokens to branch off their lines. Like, if I do this and this, that's 3 points plus the 1 point, plus another point, plus this. You're trying to get as many points as you can, while also as the lines get more spread out over the board, you're trying to kind of take control of where the passenger goes. Now, once the deck is empty, that's the end of the game, and that's when everyone gets the same number of turns. Then you just see who scored the most points. If there's a tie, whoever has the most branch tiles wins. Now, that's the London board. Let me flip it over and show you just a few differences on the Berlin side. This is the Berlin board, and the Berlin board has these stacks of landmark tiles, and they come in piles of 2, 3, and 1, and they're scattered all over the board. So in this game, loops don't do anything, and you have no connections. Instead, you have these station tiles, and you have the landmarks. So let me go through these. So the first time you connect to one of these stations with a line, it's just 0 points, so it doesn't do anything. But if you manage to connect it over time to another station with the plus symbol, that is going to be 2 points for the second. And if you can do it to a third, that's 2 more points, and 4 points for the fourth station. So if you can make one line connect to 4 different stations, that's going to earn you 8 points ultimately. Landmarks, whenever a line connects to a station with a landmark, you take one of those tiles and keep it face up in front of you. So let's say the green line connects over here, 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 and here. That player picks up one of these and one of these and puts them in front of them. If you manage to collect all 5 different tiles, you discard them and immediately get 10 points. And at the end of the game, some of those unscored tiles can also be worth points. At the end of a game with the Berlin map, you count up all the landmark tiles you have of each type, and you earn 3 points per tile of the type with the most tiles. So let's say at the end of the game, after I did all my sets, I had two tennis tiles, and that's the most of any tile I had. That's 6 extra points. Otherwise, that's the only difference, is you have the stations, the landmark tiles, and no loops in this version. And obviously, since it's a different city, the station layout is completely different. But that's pretty much the game. You make lines, use the branch tiles to branch off of them, and depending on the map you're on, you're just trying to score as many different points by connecting to things and having the passenger use your lines. And that's the game. So this was a lot of fun. I think presentation-wise, it looks beautiful. I do appreciate the 2 different boards that feel different enough, not only in placement, but in gameplay. I think the biggest crutch this game has is that for such a light game, the way the passenger moves is way too complicated. First, you look at empty track spaces, then you look at fewest lines, and it depends on what cards are drawn. It doesn't sound that bad. In the beginning, it's not, because there's not that many tracks on the board. But as it gets full of these very complicated, tangled lines everywhere, sometimes it can just be, frankly, a headache to figure out exactly where the passenger needs to go. It's something you get used to as you play, but it never, for some people, truly felt intuitive. And that's kind of a problem, because I think it's a very light game and otherwise. Berlin's board was my preferred choice. I felt that London's scoring options were a little too simple for my tastes. Picking up the landmark tiles, collecting those, connecting the stations, that felt more satisfying to me. And it gave you more to think about than just where's the passenger going. But both sides are fun. Of course, with a game like this, sometimes a player can be favored just by sheer luck of the draw, right? If you keep happening to draw stops that are close to a certain player's lines, and then of course they're going to keep scoring. It's not a significant problem, but there's obviously going to be, a bit of a luck factor there. Overall, though, every time I played this game, I always enjoyed it. Once you can wrap your head around how the passenger moves, it does become a fun, competitive, sort of scrambling to try and force them to take your rails for more points, and kind of blocking off your opponents, and fighting for coverage of the board. It is a very entertaining game. I think a simplification of the passenger would maybe benefit the game, but as it is, I still had a very good time with it.